Maharal started by looking at the sun standing still for Yoshua, which gave him a couple of launching points that are less obvious than other miracles. The first one was, the Gemara says the sun stood still twice, once at noon and once at midnight. He associated the various opinions of the Gemara for how long it stood still with the path of the sun. So that if it stood still at 6 hours, it was because dawn to noon was 6 hours. So, or if it was 12 hours, it's because midnight to noon was the sun rising for 12 hours, even though you could only see 6 of them. But this gave him the ability to talk about the fact that miracles are happening based on the human perception. After all, noon is local to where you are. And the whole difference between the sun going up and the sun going down is a human perception thing, right? There is no sunrise. Like, I like to talk about metaphors, right? You have Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's busy discussing, scientific exactitude in the community. Still uses the word sunrise, even though he knows the Earth is spinning the other way. And the Maharal does. Well, the Maharal doesn't talk about the Earth spinning the other way. That's not true. The Maharal talks about the sun in its orbit, or in its galgal, in its sphere. And the fact that sunrise and sunset are different are just how they look here on Earth, but it's just going in a circle, right? Just like noon is local to the one valley where Yoshua and the war were. So he says that miracles happen, based on human perception. And more than that, whether you get the miracle or you get the natural reality is based on the person. So that both happen at the same time. It's not like when a miracle happens, it necessarily means that nature was interrupted. It's just a second system that could be going on in parallel, which leads him to the very strange conclusion that the sun only stood still in Givon. So when the pasuk says Shemesh beGivon Dam, it actually stood still in Givon and not anywhere else. That's where we were last week, right? We had the same thing. Well, we gave other examples, but we'll see the other examples when the Maharal gets to them. Now he really wants to explore this idea whether miracles happen in the whole world, or they only happen to the people who need to experience the miracle. Amnam tzarich iyun. We have to explore. This is the top of Lamed test, the first text on the screen. Im nasa nes zel chol olam. Did this miracle happen to the whole world? O lo nasa nes rak ba'ofek kohu, or if it only happened in that one valley. Yesh lomar, one could say, Kili Yoshua Yisrael bofek kohu haya midas shemesh. For Yoshua and the Jews in that one valley, in that one location, the sun stood still. But in the rest of the world, the sun didn't stand still. That's even more amazing. Moral Gevuros Hashem Yisparach v'niflosav, and it shows the might of Hashem and His miracles. Because if you think about it, we expect consistency. This touches on that whole debate as to whether, like, God could make a paradox. I'm not really sure it is an example of a paradox. I mean, it seems paradoxical that, like, the sun could be moving for one person and still for another person. But it gets into that question as to whether logic, is God subject to logic, or is logic something God made? So the Yomar, and if you say how is such a thing possible? You say the sun would go and would be moving and still at the same time. that this in itself is the way the Ralbag wrote, that they are two different things at one time, in one occurrence. Lo yiskabtu yachad, and they couldn't happen together. So the Ralbag says, like the Rambam or most of the rationalists, that God cannot make something both black and white at the same time, right? Two opposites, like God can't defy logic. So two opposites can't coexist. That would be a paradox. The Ralbag says paradox is impossible. But we already said that he's not right about this. Because it's possible that the sun could move from the perspective of its normal behavior, and it stands still from the side of miracle. Because it could be that one thing has two opposite attributes from two different perspectives. And nature is one thing. And the non-natural is also one thing. There's no doubt. A miracle that defies nature, is greater than the natural, right? I mean, I don't know if everybody says this. I mean, Maharal takes it that there's no suffix that something that defies nature is greater than something that's not, that something is natural. But the fact that things actually follow laws and patterns, I think, is pretty amazing. Since they're two different madrigos levels, so the sun was in two aspects, depending upon the difference in level. It's moving in the natural plane and not moving in the supernatural plane. Just like it is appropriate that it move according to nature, there's also an intellectual level that in the middle of the sky it should not, it should stand still. Like it was said, that's an intellectual level. It's not natural. And therefore the sun stood still on the non-natural plane. Yeshua va'amo, and Yeshua and his nation, since they needed the miracle that was not natural, for them it stood still. For the rest of the world that didn't need the miracle, they had the natural pattern. So the way the Maharal answers this, I think, is by saying that the rationalist's entire way of viewing the world is off. You think of the sun as one thing, and therefore the sun is either moving or not moving, and for it to be both would be a paradox. The Maharal is turning on the idea that we look at the sun in relationship. So the sun in relationship to nature could be one thing, and the sun in relationship to the non-natural, the intellectual, the spiritual, the whatever you want to call it, is doing something else. And that it's not really, that's what I was saying earlier. I'm not really sure he's asserting that Hashem could do the paradoxical. I think he's saying more that what you think as one thing, and therefore it could only have one truth value, is really many things, because the sun in relationship to Yeshua is one thing, and the sun in relationship to somebody who's at that point in time standing in Egypt is something else. And therefore you don't have one predicate with two different truth values. You have two different predicates that are both about the sun. I often like asking which came first, the city or the road. Anybody want to hazard a guess? An opinion? I mean, we usually define roads as opposed to streets. Roads are the paths between cities. But if you look, the majority of time, cities end up where transportation is convenient. So, like,
The road crosses a
New
river.
York ends up at the bottom of the Hudson, or Philly, or Boston, right? Or
Where
the
the
Mississippi,
Roman road crosses Thames. Yeah.
right? Or Yerushalayim being between the
That's
two
right, man.
roads from
For
Asia to
London
Africa,
paragraphs.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Jewish perspective has been more that cities are the products of roads, by which I mean what we think of as a noun and an object is really a bundle of relationships. It's not there is an object and the object then relates to various things like, it's his ball, it's it's his house, it's that one's next door neighbor's house, it's this one's source of noise because, the people are noisy. It's that one's no, it's the house is actually secondary to that set of relationships. And so there is no one object that could only have one truth value. Each relationship could only have one truth value. But you can't make a claim about the house. You can only make the claim about the house in relation to something else. I think Chazal don't have a law of excluded middle. Don't have a law of contradiction because they didn't they didn't see, they don't list the predicates the way the Greeks would have. Right? They don't have an attribute of a house because a house is a bundle. I think that that's fundamental to understanding what he's saying about the sun. Right? You think of the sun as an object, but the sun in relationship to Yeshua and the nation is a different thing than the sun in relationship to another observer. And therefore, the people who needed miracles got a miraculous sun. People who didn't need miracles didn't have a miraculous sun. And the Maharal doesn't see this as a contradiction about the sun. So after making that argument about miracles being able to be localized and not, the same truth value for everybody, he gives another example in Mem. When Moshe's staff was turned into a snake, in suffix, there's no doubt there's no doubt that that's not natural. I mean, there's no law of nature by which sticks turn into snakes. And therefore, from the side of nature, it wasn't a snake. So now he's extending from the one example that he had of the sun standing still for Yeshua to the miracle of the staff turning into a snake. She'im haya nachash b'teva, because if it was naturally a snake on the natural plane, im kain kvar haya nifsad amate v'shav nachash. If so, there was nothing about this thing that was staff anymore. It was entirely snake. Veina love shaimate od, and it wouldn't have been called a mate. And once it's fully snake, why did that staff have to turn back into the? Why did that snake have to turn back into the staff? It's a snake like any other snake. Some other snake could have become the snake, the staff. We're going to say that it was only a nachash on the plane of miracles, of a low teva, but on the plane of nature, it was still a mate. So the pasuk still calls it mate, even when it's a snake. and it has to be the one that becomes a mata again, because on the natural plane it never stopped being a mata. It can't be like some other snake turns into a staff, because this is both staff and snake. It went from being staff to being staff and snake, depending upon the observer's frame of reference, to being just a staff again. Mem Aleph. V'kach efsher hu v'yachal lios. It's possible, and it could have been, ki Yeshua haya ole besulam hashemayma, that Yeshua took a ladder up to the sky. I think it's just figurative, because I don't think anybody actually pictures Yeshua climbing. How high did Chazal say the sun was? 500-year walking trip to reach the sun, something like that. Ki Yoshua haya ola besulam hashemayma, that Yoshua actually went up a ladder to the heavens. It just means he ascended. Vayamoshel ala shemesh, and he ruled over the sun, velomar lo dome, and commanded it to stop. V'nislavsha hashemesh betzurazos sheina tivis, and thereby the sun took on this non-natural form. Kasher gazar leha, because he commanded her. V'hine tziyur metzios hashemesh el Yoshua kasher roi, and therefore the existence of the sun took on the form for Yeshua that was appropriate. V'chein hu elav ba'ofek hahu, and therefore it was in that location. B'shar ofakim b'teva gamor, but everywhere else it stayed in the natural form. Ki ein safek sheish l'shemesh hachana latmida. There's no doubt that the sun has a certain propensity to stop. Not propensity. What's the word I'm looking for? Some potential hachana, some preparedness to stop. Moshe bar labala, like we said above, right? There's a difference from the human perspective between going up and going down. So when it switches, there's a moment where it's not going up and not going down. There's a potential for it to stop there, at least as from the human frame of reference. And from that preparedness, it was able to stop by miracle. But the natural behavior happened for the whole world, because they were prepared for the natural. It's worth knowing this. It's worth understanding this. So don't ask to yourself, how can we even picture such a thing? We say that the sun stood still for Yoshua and his people alone, and it moved for the rest of the world. Then the world, it descended from the world from this place. And for Yoshua, it was over the. Like, think what this would mean for somebody one valley over, right? So in Givon, the sun is still shining, and Yeshua standing in Givon, he sees the sun still shining. And for somebody one neighborhood over, he sees Givon's in shadow. In a shakal olam in ofek, to the rest of the world, it would look like the sun set from that one place that Yeshua was in, and from Yeshua it was still standing. How could it be that they see Yeshua and his crowd in shadow when they're in the sunlight? No question. If you understand what Chazal said. Because this is what happened to Yeshua in a miraculous way on a level that was not natural. It has no connection to Teva. And therefore it stands over the valley. The sun stood still over the valley from the non-natural plane, frame of reference. Anhagas Hateva, and it's set over that same valley, according to the natural behavior. But Nisim Ein Ladaber Bahem V'Lamod Aleim Mitzad Hateva. You can't talk about miracles in the way of nature. Ki Ein Nisim Yotzim Miteva Shalolam, because they're not part of nature. All these wise people are talking about natural behavior. Hu davar havai. That's ridiculous. It's nonsense. The overall rule is that this is the behavior of miracles. Don't expect miracles to follow natural law. So you have all these people who are like, well, the Kriyas Yamsuf would have been possible with the wind and the this and the right. The Maharal doesn't take this idea of trying to minimize the miracle. Miracles just operate by a different set of rules than nature, and trying to find natural ways that the miracle was not as astounding just runs contrary to his whole idea of how miracles work. Also, the miracle that was done for Chizkiyahu, which was another sun miracle, that it went back 10 hours of travel. Tzarich ian bezeh im haya hanes l'chol ha'olam or hanes l'Chizkiyahu davka. You also have to look, was the miracle for the whole world or only for Chizkiyahu? Sha'alav shava shemesh la'achar 10 malos, because for him it went back 10 degrees. If they really think it means 10 hours worth of travel, not 10, 1/36th of the circle. L'chol ha'olam holeches keseder. For the rest of the world, it went in its normal way. Bim Tomar, and if you want to say, how is it possible? How could the sun go forward and backwards at the same time? And in that way, it's doing two contradictory things at once. This is also explained from what we said. It could very well be that goes back in the way of miracle of wonders and miracles. It's not the same thing as nature altogether. They're two different things from two different levels, two different planes. Again, he's dealing with this idea that the sun, in relationship to somebody in one frame of reference, doesn't have to have the same predicates, doesn't have to have the same truth values as the sun in another frame of reference. Now you can understand why the booklet that turned me on to this Hakdama was kept on comparing it to relativity. Where two people, because they have two different frames of references, experience different things. So therefore it came out that for Chizkiah, who was dealing on the level of Nace, it goes backwards. And according to the way of the world, it went in its normal way. So now he gives two more examples, this time from the Makos. We see clear examples of something and its opposite happening at once. Amru Rabbeinu Zal, our sages said in Shmos Rabbah, if there was a bowl full of water, and a Jew and a Mitzri were drinking at the same time, together. The Jew drank water, Mitzri Dam, and the Mitzri only got blood. The water was natural for the Jew, and it was in an unnatural state for the Egyptians. Makas Choshekh. Similarly by Choshekh, Amru Shal Choshekh Mitzrayim, it was dark for the Mitzrayim, and when the Jew went into the place, he had light. ba'avir, or v'choshekh. The air was in two physical states. It was light at the same time that it was dark. His explanation of Makas Dam isn't that the water turned into blood when the Mitzri picked it up and turned into water when the Jew picked it up, or like it turned into blood or water if they drank that at two straws out of the same cup, but rather it was two contradictory natures at the same time. And similarly, Makas Choshekh, the same room was light in one frame of reference, and it was dark in the other frame of reference. It wasn't that the Mitzrayim suddenly got cataracts, or that they couldn't see the light. That's not so. The air itself was dark for the Mitzrayim. And the Jews, they didn't have dark at night. Two opposites in one thing, which is the air. This teaches more about the abilities of the one who did the miracle. He only has to create miracle only for the person who needs the miracle. Somebody who doesn't need the miracle stays in the nature. So miracles not only defy nature according to the Maharal, which is what most of us would believe, but they only defy nature for the person who needs nature to be defied. Every miracle involves two opposites in one event. One natural and one not natural. And since the Mitzrayim who are receiving the experience, it's appropriate for them to receive darkness, Yisrael or and the Jews to receive light. Therefore, here we had two opposites, based on the recipients. The Gam Hamayim, observer, we would say. The Gam Hamayim, also water, Yesh Leim Achana Maliyos Dam. They have some preparedness to be blood. The Zemitad Shekol Mayim Yesh Bahem Harkava, because every water has impurities. Veinam Pshutim Lagamre, and is not entirely H2O. So because the water in all over Egypt was not distilled water, it did have some of the elements that could have been blood. Since there was that little element of preparedness, it could become blood for the Mitzrayim, not through nature. That it took on the form of blood through this little bit of preparedness. Even though it's not entirely ready, right? Even though that's not like a natural process, that it was like totally prepared to be blood. It became blood not naturally. And for the Jews, the water stayed water as it is. So I want to step back for a moment and point out the Ran, right? The Ran was saying that miracles are possible because the Jews were given the secrets of Masa Bereshis, and therefore they know how the Malachim and everything above the physical are manipulating the physical events into existence, and why, and the purpose of things. Right, the Iker for him for Masa Bereshis was because in order to live with the Torah, you have to know the purpose of things. But in terms of miracles, knowing how things are ordered into nature gives you the ability to go beyond nature, like the way we just saw Yoshua commanding the sun. Right, we saw last week that he called the sun a servant, because a servant is physical, and Yoshua was sickly, right? He had an intellect which goes above the physical, and right, the master who's young, but commanding the servant who's older. If you remember the mashal from last time we met. So right, we had the what's it called? No, it was Masa Bereshis, not Masa Merkava Zipporah. Masa Bereshis, according to the Ran, is knowing the interface between the metaphysical and the physical. Right? He objected to the Rambam, who said that Masa Bereshis was knowing how the physical operates, because he said there's no way the Mishnah would say that you have to keep that a secret. Farmers need to know how to farm, and engineers need to know how to engineer, and you can't keep science to the 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 Mavinim, to the elite. He said Masa Bereshis had to be the how the angels make science happen. There's the interface. Masa Merkava is between the metaphysics and God, and Masa Bereshis is between the metaphysics and the physical world. And then the Maharal in the first Hakdama added Sod Arayos as how the various parts of the physical world. No, that wasn't the Maharal. That was also the Rod. Sod Arayos was a third. No, Sod Arayos was the Maharal. I was right the first time. Right, was how various things combine. Right, which is what gives you the law of arayos, because that's things that shouldn't be combined. But that was his three metaphysics, right? But but in any case, by being in touch with the Malach telling the sun to move, Yoshua is able to. That was the way the Ran would have put it. The Ran would have put it. That was how Yoshua had the ability to tell the sun not to move. The Maharal is taking that one step further and saying whether or not the sun moves is specific to where you stand in relation to Masa Bereshis. So you're not just Masa Bereshis gets you to undo Teva. Masa Bereshis gets you results that are unrelated to Teva. Right? There's a different relationship being implied between knowing the spirituality and knowing the physics. According to the Ran, if you know enough spirituality, you could intervene before the spirituality becomes physics to get miracles to happen. According to the Maharal, you'll be on a plane where you're ready to receive a different reality. And for everybody else, the physics still happens. So you're not intervening to prevent physics. You're changing perspective so that non-physical results can reach some people as needed. So one focuses on Masa Bereshis as the power to command, and the Maharal is focusing on Masa Bereshis, or whatever he would have called it, as being the ability to receive something different. Basically, we continue the metaphor of relativity of frame of reference. You're changing your frame of reference. The Yoser Mizeh Amar Rabbeinu Zal. So even more than that, our Chazal said, Al Eretz Tzvi, about the pasuk in Daniel that compares the land to a deer. That deer skin apparently grows as is stretchable. So biyoso yoshvim. Oh, and Tzvi doesn't really mean deer. It means some deer-like animal that's actually native to Eretz Yisrael. Sorry, but Natan Slifkin has actually heard one of these shirim, so I don't want him to have conniptions. It's a gazelle or something, but it's something in the deer family. Biyosim yoshvim aleha murveches. When we live on it, it becomes broader. And when we don't live on it, it's narrow. I mean, if you're a physicist, this makes no sense, right? Or a geometer, this makes no sense. The size of a land has nothing to do with how many people are living in it. When one physical thing goes into another physical thing, the land's not going to get bigger when there are people on it. And like one thing would go into another thing when nobody lives in it. But according to those who master the Torah, this is all true and correct. Shavada lefia tever yefshar, even though naturally it's impossible. But there's the non-natural frame of reference, and that it could easily happen. Kitive davar bifnei atzmo, the nature of a thing is on one is by itself. Shu lefi tivi, which is according to nature. Vadavar sheino tivi gam came bifnei atzmo, and the non-natural is also by itself. Klala davar. So the big rule of the thing is, don't worry, he has a number of big rules before we're done. Bipnei shenelam mehem inyan hanisim, because the miracles were hidden from them, sheina tivim, which are not natural, because they're a bunch of physicists and chemists and so on. They're worried about is how nature works. Huk shalahem devarim elu. So these things became hard for them. And they had a hard time understanding them. Avalisha chacham b'dvarim elu, but somebody who's wise in these things, yimtza shakol nivna al adoshim b'chachma v'mudei tfuna. Everything stands according to its foundation in wisdom, and the pillar of the base of the pillar and the pillar of understanding, and understand these things well. They themselves say, anything that we don't know its reason or its cause, we can't speak about its essence. Thing's essence is hidden from us. Because only by the causes can we know something's essence. They can't possibly know how a stick becomes a snake. And in a blink of an eye, it returns to being like it was before. I don't know whose asterisk this is because they're not clickable, but I have a feeling that whoever's commentary it is bothered by this Yachazor, because according to nature, it never stopped being a snake. If you want to say that the body of the staff became a snake, says, why would it have to be with a staff? Why couldn't it be a hat? Some other thing. Klala davar, what's the principle of it? Told you that he's doing a number of klala davars. Janela mehem sibas inyan anisim eza inyan haim. They're missing the basic idea behind a miracle. So they shouldn't talk about the substance of a miracle. They don't understand what causes miracles, so they don't understand the essence of a miracle. Chazal, who are masters of the truth, Yadu b'kablusam, had known from their tradition, Inyan anisim v'niflos, everything there is to know about miracles and wonders. Therefore, therefore they could lay out miracles as they actually were. And anybody who veers from their path is veering from the ways of life. Amru. So Chazal said, Asara nisim nasu lavasenu b'beis Mikdash. There were 10 miracles that happened to our ancestors in the base of Mikdash until the days of Shimon HaTzadik. or until after the days of Shimon Tzaddik. Echad mehem, what were one of the 10 things? Omdim tzfufim, that when they stood, it was crowded. Umishtachavim revuchim, but when they bowed down and laid on the floor in prostration, there was enough room. Hine gamda rezehu nimnam lefilosofim. Philosophers can't get this one either. Shezehu yichanes geshem geshem lefi sha'ah. It's one thing going into another, one physical thing going another physical thing for a time. Kima sheishtachavu harevuchim lefi sha'ah sheniskadal amakom, because what the fact that they were able to prostrate themselves with enough room at the time that the area became bigger. Lo haisa hazara gedola mimasha yakodem, and yet the hazara was no larger than it normally was. Amnam lafi divrei chachmei emes ein ze yitzia min hateva. But according to the people who understand the truth, the Chazal, this is not a departure from nature. Ki davar shu derech nes v'derech hela eino tivi. It's not a departure from nature. It's just not nature at all. Right? The way of miracle and wonder is not the way of nature. And has nothing to do with nature. Until it's difficult, so that it should be difficult. It's something without nature at all. When they bowed, there was enough room. Because this was through the non-physical, the separated world, from which miracles come into the world. Doesn't this sound like the plane of Masabratius above physics that the Ran was talking about? And up there, there's always enough room. It's as though they left the natural world to be standing in a place that's not natural, which has no partnership, no commerce with the natural. Lo yidchak es hativi, and the non-natural doesn't push away the natural. V'nishara makom b'gud lo l'shara nashim, and everybody else who wasn't among the prostrators that had the same size. Ach el hamishtachavim haya b'revuach, but for those who were bowing, it was roomy. V'yesh remez muflag. There's a great hint, an amazing hint. That it was specifically the prostration that had all this spaciousness. Because they bowed to the name Shem Havaya, to the name of God. And with this you'll understand. It says in Sukkah, Lashem anu mishtachavim. We bow to Hashem. Lashem amunu modim, and we give acknowledgement. We give thanks to Hashem. V'shem zeh marchiv b'tzar, and this name is connected with constriction. Dichsiv min hametzar karasika. I call God from within constriction. Anani b'merchavka, and He'll answer me from the merchav, from the width, from the openness of ka. V'hu davar pela mihavin. So he's saying that the hishtachavaya, which is associated with the name Yud Hey, in particular, from as we see Masechet Sukkah, like leka anu mishtachavim, is a remnant to the pasuk min hametzar karasika anani b'merchavka. When I call you in constriction, you'll answer me in the wide open. Meaning, when I call you, when I have no options, you'll answer me with options. Lo l'chasafek, have no doubt. Kikol anisim asher hayu l'davar, any miracle that happened for a particular reason, hayu b'shvil achana, happened because of preparation. Shayu k'tzad achana nimtzeis, that some little seed of preparation already existed. Kamo shamarnu, like we said, because sher haya makom kadosh miyuchad biyoser l'mala hanivdalas, because the place was particularly holy incredibly so, on a totally different level. When they bowed, then it reached, right? It was very, very close. It was so holy, it was close to the non-physical plane. And when they bowed, it reached the non-physical plane, and there's spaciousness. Kien Saros, there's only constriction, there's only a limitation of volume. Rak begeshem, only among physical things. Veich lo yi nimtzar chava me'ach she'igia lamala nivdelas she'yarchava rechava. And how could there not be plenty of space once they, through the ishtachavaya, bring the holiness of the floor of the Beis Hamikdash all the way into the non-physical plane, which has no spatial limitations. It'll be explained a little later on in Perek Daled. Eitzel el eretz tova urchava. Klal davar, another general principle he brings. Ki efsher hu bevadai. It's definitely possible. Ki yuchal liyos nimtza davar echad b'shtei panim. That something could exist in two different aspects. Lechad TV, lechad bilti TV. One natural, one unnatural. So he's now calling them different aspects, different panim. Hamayim dam lemitzrim, the way the water could be blood for the mitzrim, the TV Israel in its natural water state for the Jews. By Choshekh lemitzrayim, or it could be dark for the Egyptians, lemitzrim, but or Israel, or and light for the Jews. Lo huku a mitzrim mitzanvarim, and it's not that the mitzrim were struck blind. Rak ba'avishne avachim. Right, again, we said the air itself had two different properties, two opposing properties, depending upon the recipient, the one doing the perceiving. Kiabil TTV 3D, because the natural is not a constant. Ach hu lefi sha'a, right? The non-natural is not a constant. It only happens for a time. Me'achashu hu lefi sha'a, and after that time, oh, and since that it's only temporary, therefore it too requires for this occurrence, for this appearance, for this thing to happen, for this nimtza, for this existence, that it would need this thing, and it's prepared for it, and it finds a way of miracle that is not natural, and not for anything else. So because it's temporary, it only happens to something that is ready for it. Vamnam kasha hu lahasig al adam she'ech tasuv biglala lafi minhaga. Therefore, it's hard for a person to comprehend eich tasuv biglala. How would it cause, because of this, according to its behavior, the al derech mofes tashuv acharanith, and by miracle it would go backwards. Kizeu lefisha adam hu TV, because people are natural beings. Eno masig rak TV, and therefore we only understand nature. Lefichach nela mimenu hadavar TV. Therefore, we're the non-natural is beyond our comprehension. Lekachin raya min ta'asa adam, and therefore logical doesn't prove anything. Common sense is based on the natural world. We're natural beings. So don't ask me, this makes no sense, because sense is primed by nature, right? So don't expect miracles to make sense. Therefore, all miracles are impossible by nature. Only in the elevated world, the non-physical world, which is above nature, they are possible. And the way the nature runs in its way among the natural, and therefore the non-natural occurrences happen on its things as is appropriate. So the Maharal is now breaking a new ground, and he's saying that the way non-nature works is by taking that seed of something and bringing it out of the natural world. If you bring it out of the natural world, then another set of rules apply. Lefichach, therefore, Pesher Hechia Eliyahu ben Zarfis, when Eliyahu brought the son of the Tzarfis to life, back to life, Elisha ben Shunamis, or Elisha revived the son of the Shunamis, that is certainly not possible naturally. Lo haya nimna po'al Hashem, but that doesn't stop Hashem's action. Ki neviim al yidei shal yudvekim b'olam hanivdol, neviim, because they're attached to the supernatural world, the non-physical world. They could open up the closed door, by which he means the physical world, which is closed by physical people. They open up the closed gates, and they go into the non-physical world, and they bring in from the non-physical world something that can never be by nature. Klala davar. So now his last general principle, which is not just a guess. I mean, we're running out of text here. Klala davar. Kol anisim, the one who does miracles, who yitzim in olam. What does miracles? Taking it out of this world, hateva, l'chadesh hadavar sheinu TV, to make something new that is not natural. And it should never cross our minds to try to bring proofs from the natural things to miracles and wonders that are not natural. Because the things are not natural, they are made by the Creator, the way natural things are made. But Timtza, and it turns out, the physical forms will rule, as the substance is ready to receive it. And therefore they will rule without physical, they'll have influence without the physical thing from Hashem Yisparach, according to his wisdom. Like we said at long length above. And we could explain the wonders to the extent that we can understand them. This is enough to talk about the things that are wondrous miracles, hidden miracles. And Hashem Yisparach will enlighten our eyes. I think at this point he's paying lip service to the idea that he had in the first Hakdama, that a lot of things are beyond our ability to understand. And since this is tied to Ma'aser Bereshis, he's saying that there's a basic limit to what he can explain. Now, to have Dessler, what the Maharal is saying here is that the world of nature is Olam HaYitzira, Olam HaAsiya. So the bottom of the Kabbalah's 4 sets of worlds follows the laws of nature. A Navi can enter the Olam HaYitzira one level up, and therefore call up forces or patterns of behavior that apply to the world of Olam HaYitzira. However, who gets it is entirely on the state of the recipient. And therefore, you could still have what some people experiencing the natural world, and some people experiencing the miracle that is brought down from the higher world. But the Rav Dessler actually associates this with the four alamas of Kabbalah. Basically, what he says is that if somebody were to see the world, it's not, most people, they expect when you let go of something, it falls. The law of gravity is, if you let go of something and just floated, you'd be astounded. But if a criminal gets away with his crime, you're not astounded. I mean, we're frustrated, but it doesn't have the same sense of, oh my God, a miracle. Or if somebody who did good gets punished, right? You don't go, oh my God, it's a right. The laws of supernatural laws don't seem as absolute to us. The laws of justice, of fairness, don't seem as absolute to us as the laws of physics. So we end up living in a world where all we experience is physics. Whereas Rav Chanina ben Dosa had no problem believing that the one who commanded oil to burn could command vinegar to burn. And therefore Rav Chanina ben Dosa, had no greater ability. He had no bigger problem understanding a violation of the laws of physics than he would a violation of the laws of metaphysics. But he lived in a world where miracles were commonplace. That's the Maharal on miracles. The next time we'll be back on the run.